It's Alison Hardy, and I'm just going to talk to you briefly about what design fiction is and how we're using it in technology education here in England. So design fiction is a strategy that designers have been using to test out and explore new ideas by using prototypes and storytelling. So we've been sort of starting to experiment with using that in design and technology education in England, because as part of the new curriculum, children have to learn about new and emerging technologies, so such as artificial intelligence, robotics, autonomous vehicles, and so new ideas that really they don't physically come into contact, things that they can't make with, but they are starting to hear about in the news and that designers are beginning to design with. So it's about things that are really, as I would say, just around the corner, things that are just being explored now and we're just seeing their potential. So design fiction is a way that we can bring those new technologies into the classroom and free children from the idea of having to fully make a prototype that actually works, but they can actually just explore the concept by doing some prototyping, which might be a physical three-dimensional model, or it might be a system or a process that involves one of these new technologies. So that's the idea behind it. And it really comes from films, the idea that when we watch a movie, that we see items within the movie that are part of the story, but actually if we turn the cameras off, they maybe don't fully work. They're just a prototype or they're just a mock-up. So design fiction sort of borrows from that idea within movies. So for design fiction, there's three things that need to be in place. And I've taken these from some work off a website, and I'll send Mike the details so he can share those with you. So this is not my ideas in terms of these 3 points about developing design fiction, but I've adapted them for use in education with children sort of under the age of 16. So the first thing is that the children need to have an understanding of the thing that they're going to be designing with. So let's, for example, say that children are going to be designing about autonomous vehicles. So they have to understand that reality, have to understand that technology. That is really important. Otherwise, when they start designing, it is like science fiction because they don't really get it. So first of all, the first thing is kind of and the guys that I've taken this from, they call it the coordinates of reality. And so for us in design and technology, the coordinates of reality about autonomous vehicles will be understanding how autonomous vehicles work, what developments are happening, what some of the ideas that other companies are happening, where they've come from, why people see there's a need. So having a reasonably deep understanding of this new technology. Then the second part is that they have to create the fictional story world. So they've got the technology. Now, where are we designing for? What's the location, sort of thing? So we've been thinking and exploring around sort of healthcare issues, around contexts where people are having their driving licence taken away from them because of health issues, but they still need to be mobile. They might be out in a rural community, so there's no buses. So they have a kind of a context to design for. So who are we designing for? So that's one way of exploring who are we designing for. But another way of looking at it is we might start thinking, what about if? And asking sort of open-ended questions that children can explore the sort of story world for. So what if there was no public transport? You know, what if we had no, that we could no longer upkeep the roads, and so we had to explore the ways of getting around. So creating the story in that way. So they have to explore that context before they sort of begin designing. And then the final thing is bringing these two things together. So the understanding of the reality and the context, and bring them together and then begin designing, which they're able to do because they understand who they're designing for, or where they're designing for, or what situation they're designing for, and then they also understand what they are designing with. And they bring these together, and so these things kind of work backwards and forwards. They're telling the story, they're designing the product, and they kind of go backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. And as they start to sort of really kind of get to grips with this and develop it, and they'll maybe have some models going on with this, then what the children will do is they'll start to get to a point of, a product and the story. And what we're playing around with here is that the story could be written. So that's a great way of involving creative writing and literature into the lesson. We've even considered whether the fictional world we use a particular genre of story. And then also they still write the story, or they can act it out. You can do an internet search for design fiction, there's loads of videos around of designers using this, and there's been Internet of Things projects using design fiction. So they could act it out, and we could take a video of it with a telephone or a tablet or whatever, and then we can show that, and we can kind of unpick how that works. Or they could just draw a storyboard. So there's a number of different ways that this could be explored. And then what happens is that really stimulates a really rich conversation about the ethics of this. So, okay, so we've got people who want to remain in their homes, and they're out in a rural community, and they want to travel around, but they can't because they've had their cars taken from them. So we've designed this autonomous vehicle that they can use. But what's the implications of that? What might happen? Is that right? Is that wrong? If they've then all got their own individual mode of transport, one thing about the bus system is that people get on the bus, they get to see each other, builds up a community. But if we now have an individual bus, and so on, so all these kind of really interesting conversations can come out around ethics as well. And then another starting point, or another way to look at it, is we could find some stories that are on the news from like 10, 12 years ago, some internet stories about people talking about this was what might happen in the future. And then we can use those stories to go, okay, well, that's what they said in 2005. Now in 2018, 2019, is that really happening? So, and then that gives a good launch pad to say, okay, we're now going to do this thing. We are going to design tomorrow's world, and we're going to design tomorrow's world around this particular new and emerging technology. So I think it's got lots of potential. It kind of frees children from having to think about, I've got to make this and it's got to work, because they're just going to get to prototype, and actually the story brings the whole thing alive. And it enables children who've got really vivid imaginations to work on this, and they can work in pairs or groups, they can have writing frames and so on. Okay, so that's what we're doing and thinking about here around design fiction. So I'd be really excited to hear what you do and if you take this forward.